Chapter 4, Part 9. Cultural invasion further signifies that the ultimate seat of decision regarding the action of those who are invaded lies not with them, but with the invaders. And when the power of decision is located outside rather than within the one who should decide, the latter has only the illusion of deciding. This is why there can be no socio-economic development in a dual, reflex invaded society. For development to occur, it is necessary a. that there be a movement of search and creativity having its seat of decision in the searcher, and b. that this movement occur not only in space, but in the existential time of the conscious searcher. Thus, while all development is transformation, not all transformation is development. The transformation occurring in a seed which under favorable conditions germinates and sprouts is not development. In the same way, the transformation of an animal is not development. The transformations of seeds and animals are determined by the species to which they belong, and they occur in a time which does not belong to them, for time belongs to humankind. Women and men, among the uncompleted beings, are the only ones which develop. As historical, autobiographical beings for themselves, their transformation, development, occurs in their own existential time, never outside it. Men who are submitted to concrete conditions of oppression in which they become alienated beings for another, or of the false being for himself, on whom they depend, are not able to develop authentically. Deprived of their own power of decision, which is located in the oppressor, they follow the prescriptions of the latter. The oppressed only begin to develop when, surmounting the contradiction in which they are caught, they become beings for themselves. If we consider society as a being, it is obvious that only a society which is a being for itself can develop. Societies which are dual, reflex, invaded, and dependent on the metropolitan society cannot develop because they are alienated. Their political, economic, and cultural decision-making power is located outside themselves in the invader society. In the last analysis, the latter determines the destiny of the former. Mere transformation, for it is their transformation, not their development, that is to the interest of the metropolitan society. It is essential not to confuse modernization with development. The former, although it may affect certain groups in the satellite society, is almost always induced, and it is the metropolitan society which derives the true benefits therefrom. A society which is merely modernized without developing will continue even if it takes over some minimal delegated powers of decision, to depend on the outside country. This is the fate of any dependent society, as long as it remains dependent. In order to determine whether or not a society is developing, one must go beyond criteria based on indices of per capita income, which, expressed in statistical form, are misleading, as well as those which concentrate on the study of gross income. The basic elementary criterion is whether or not the society is a being for itself. If it is not, the other criteria indicate modernization rather than development. The principal contradiction of dual societies is the relationship of dependency between them and the metropolitan society. Once the contradiction has been superseded, the transformation hitherto effected through aid, which has primarily benefited the metropolitan society, becomes true development, which benefits the being for itself. For the above reasons, the purely reformist solutions attempted by these societies, even though some of the reforms may frighten and even panic the more reactionary members of the elite groups, do not resolve their external and internal contradictions. Almost always, the metropolitan society induces these reformist solutions in response to the demands of the historical process, as a new way of preserving its hegemony. It is as if the metropolitan society were saying, "Let us carry out reforms before the people carry out a revolution." And in order to achieve this goal, the metropolitan society has no options other than conquest, manipulation, economic and cultural, and sometimes military invasion of the dependent society, an invasion in which the elite leaders of the dominated society to a large extent act as mere brokers for the leaders of the metropolitan society. To close this tentative analysis of the theory of anti-dialogical action, I wish to affirm that revolutionary leaders must not use the same anti-dialogical procedures used by the oppressors. On the contrary, revolutionary leaders must follow the path of dialogue and of communication. Before proceeding to analyze the theory of dialogical action, it is essential to discuss briefly how the revolutionary leadership group is formed, and some of the historical and sociological consequences for the revolutionary process. Usually, this leadership group is made up of men and women who in one way or another have belonged to the social strata of the dominators. At a certain point in their existential experience, under certain historical conditions, these leaders renounce the class to which they belong and join the oppressed. In an act of true solidarity, or so one would hope. Whether or not this adherence results from a scientific analysis of reality, it represents, when authentic, an act of love and true commitment. Joining the oppressed requires going to them and communicating with them. The people must find themselves in the emerging leaders, and the latter must find themselves in the people. The leaders who have emerged necessarily reflect the contradiction of the dominant elites communicated to them by the oppressed, who may not yet, however, clearly perceive their own state of oppression or critically recognize their relationship of antagonism to the oppressors. They may still be in the position previously termed adhesion to the oppressor. On the other hand, it is possible that due to certain objective historical conditions, they have already reached a relatively clear perception of their state of oppression. In the first case, the adhesion or partial adhesion of the people to the oppressor makes it impossible for them, to repeat Fanon's point, to locate him outside themselves. In the second case, they can locate the oppressor and can thus critically recognize their relationship of antagonism to him. In the first case, the oppressor is housed within the people, and their resulting ambiguity makes them fearful of freedom. They resort, stimulated by the oppressor, to magical explanations or a false view of God, to whom they fatalistically transfer the responsibility for their oppressed state. It is extremely unlikely that these self-mistrustful, downtrodden, hopeless people will seek their own liberation. An act of rebellion which they may view as a disobedient violation of the will of God, as an unwarranted confrontation with destiny. Hence, the oft-emphasized necessity of posing as problems the myths fed to the people by the oppressors. In the second case, when the people have reached a relatively clear picture of oppression which leads them to localize the oppressor outside themselves, they take up the struggle to surmount the contradiction in which they are caught. At this moment, they overcome the distance between class necessity and class consciousness. In the first case, the revolutionary leaders unfortunately and involuntarily become the contradiction of the people. In the second case, the emerging leaders receive from the people sympathetic and almost instantaneous support, which tends to increase during the process of revolutionary action. The leaders go to the people in a spontaneously dialogical manner. There is an almost immediate empathy between the people and the revolutionary leaders. Their mutual commitment is almost instantly sealed. In fellowship, they consider themselves co-equal contradictions of the dominant elites. From this point on, the established practice of dialogue between people and leaders is nearly unshakable. That dialogue will continue when power is reached, and the people will know that they have come to power. End of chapter 4, part 9.